The hall was silent as Lyran stepped forward. Her silver boots clicked against the smooth floor. Her dark armor shimmered under the lights. Her eyes locked on the human commander at the end of the room. Tall, strong, and quiet, he stood without a trace of fear. Around him stood the highest officers of both human and alien fleets, gathered for peace talks after years of war. Yet peace was the last thing on Lyran's mind. She did not believe in human honor. She did not believe in their strange, soft ways, their talk of mercy and balance and kindness. To her, they were weak things with sharp tongues and no claws. They had no real pride in her world. Respect was taken, not given, and today she would show them just how much she rejected their offer of unity. Captain Riker stood with his hands behind his back, calm, as always, his face unreadable, his blue eyes never leaving her. She hated that look. It made her feel like he saw everything, even what she tried to hide. Lyran stopped in front of him. She was close enough to see the scar that ran along his jaw, a gift from a battle he never spoke of. She tilted her head and smiled. Not a kind smile, but the kind wolves give before they bite. "You think you can lead us," she said loud enough for all to hear. Her voice echoed through the chamber. "You think your rules, your soft words can tame warriors?" Gasps filled the hall. A few guards reached for weapons, but Riker raised one hand, and they froze. He gave no order. He just stared at her, waiting. Lyran's heart beat hard in her chest. But she would not stop now. She took one slow step forward, and then another, until she was close enough to smell the strange human scent on his skin. Not fear, not anger, just control. Then without a word she spat at his boots. The sound of spit hitting the floor rang louder than any gunshot in that moment. Everyone waited, breath held. Even the walls seemed to lean in to hear what would happen next. Riker looked down at the spit, then back at her. He said nothing. He did nothing. He just stepped aside, walked past her, like she was not even there. The silence turned heavy. Officers looked at each other, unsure what to do. Lyran stood still, her breath tight in her chest. This was not how it was supposed to go. She expected shouting, rage, a fight, something, but he just walked away as if she was a breeze, not a storm. She turned slowly. Her eyes followed him as he left the hall. Without a backward glance, the doors closed behind him, and still, no one moved that night. She could not sleep. The image of his face, calm and cold, kept flashing through her mind. The shame burned deeper than she expected, worse than if he had struck her down. Why did he not react? She asked herself again and again. What was he planning in her world? A challenge must be answered, a blow for a blow, a word for a word. But he gave her nothing, and that nothing felt heavier than stone. In the training yard the next morning, she hit the practice dummies harder than usual, her hands bruised, her arms sore, but she did not stop. Others watched from a distance. No one dared speak to her, not after what happened. Later, a message came to her quarters, short and cold. Captain Riker requested her presence for a private session in the combat arena. No guards, no witnesses, just the two of them. She laughed when she read it. Was this his answer at last? Was he finally going to face her? She would make him regret waiting. She arrived early, her armor tight around her body, her blades sharp, her eyes hungry for a fight. The arena was wide, empty, the floor made of dark stone lights above, casting long shadows across the ground. Riker was already there, standing at the far end, in simple training gear, no weapons in sight. Just calm hands and steady eyes. "You came," he said, without emotion. "I thought you wanted to see how a real warrior fights," she replied. He nodded once, then raised his hand and motioned for her to begin. She did not wait. She moved fast, blade in hand, aiming for his chest. Her speed was deadly, her strikes clean, but he dodged each one with ease. His body moved like water, flowing around her attacks, never meeting force with force, only guiding her off balance. In seconds, she felt her arm twist, her knee drop, and his weight press her down. Her blade slid from her fingers, her breath caught as cloth wrapped tight around her mouth, not painful, but firm enough to stop words. He leaned close and whispered, "You gave up your voice the moment you disrespected peace." Then he stepped back, leaving her on her knees, heart racing, rage burning, and yet a strange heat rising in her chest. She had been beaten without pain, silenced without harm, and for the first time, she did not know what to feel, and that terrified her more than anything else. The arena was quiet again the next morning, but the silence felt different. This time not cold, but heavy, like the air was waiting to see what would happen next. Lyran sat alone on the edge of the training platform, her mouth no longer gagged, but her voice still missing, not because she was forced, but because she chose not to speak. Not yet, not until she understood why her defeat felt like something more than just a loss across the arena. Captain Riker stood with his arms crossed, watching her, his expression calm, unreadable. As always, others might have thought he was being cruel, keeping her silent, keeping her close, but Lyran saw something deeper, something in his eyes that confused her more than any strike. To the head, it was not anger, not pride, not even pity. It was something strange, something like patience. She remembered the moment clearly, the way he moved around her, like wind slipping through cracks, never stopping. Her by force, just guiding her own strength against itself until she collapsed on her knees, breathless, confused, and suddenly powerless, not from pain, but from understanding. Now she was under his command, not by chains, not by threat, but by a rule spoken only through action. No longer allowed to speak during the meetings, not until she proved herself worthy, not until she earned it back. He did not humiliate her in front of others. He gave her a choice, stay and learn, or walk away and return to her people, empty-handed, full of shame and questions she could never answer. Lyran chose to stay each morning. Riker trained her not just with weapons, but with strange lessons about human ways. About peace, about honor, that did not need to shout to be heard. She hated how much sense it made. She hated how calm he was, even when she tried to push his limits. She tried once more to fight him during training, quick and sharp as lightning her strikes. Aimed at his neck, his ribs, his knees, but he was always one step ahead, turning her attacks into wasted motion, never hurting her, never mocking her, just letting her exhaust herself until she collapsed in the dust again. She glared at him from the ground, and this time, he offered her a hand. She looked at it for a long moment, then took it for the first time without pride. That night she sat in her quarters, staring at the small screen on the wall, a replay of their fight played again and again, each movement smooth, perfect, her attacks wild and loud, his counters soft and quiet, but far more deadly. She saw herself through the recording, not a fierce warrior, but a child throwing tantrums against a mountain. The next day she did not attack, she listened, she followed his movements, tried to match his steps, tried to understand how he moved, not with muscle but with control, not with rage but with focus. She trained longer than anyone else. Even after the lights went dim and the others left, she stayed cutting through the dark with silent swings, each one sharper, each one quieter than the last. Riker watched, sometimes from a distance, never interrupting, never praising. Just watching, and that felt more powerful than any compliment she had ever known. The others began to notice her change. The guards who once avoided her now nodded. As she passed the officers who once whispered now listened. When she moved near, and Riker, he still said little, but when their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them. Not respect, not yet, but something that might become it. One evening, after a long training session, Riker approached her, his voice calm, his words few. "Tomorrow there will be a patrol to the border station. I want you to lead it." She looked at him, unsure. Why me? She wanted to ask, but did not speak, only nodded. The next day she led the team across the rocky path, toward the old outpost. Her movements sharp, her orders clear. The human soldiers followed her without question, and that surprised her even more than the silence of the mission itself. When they reached the station she found signs of tampering, strange tracks, broken panels, a missing data core. Something had been here, and not long ago. She ordered a scan, set up a perimeter, sent the report back to base, quick and precise, just like Riker taught her. When they returned he met her outside the gate, his arms crossed, his gaze steady. "Well done," he said, and for the first time, she felt something inside her move, not pride, not victory, but something warmer, something strange. She nodded once, and walked past him, but her hands trembled slightly at her sides. That night she sat alone again, but this time her mind was not filled with rage or shame, it was filled with questions about him. About herself, about what it meant to be strong without shouting, to be respected without fighting, to be silent but still heard. She reached for a small tablet, and began to write just a few words, nothing more. "Let me earn back my voice." She placed it outside his door, then walked away, heart heavy and hopeful. At once, Lyran woke before the lights of the station turned on, her eyes open to the quiet dark, her breath slow, her body sore, but her mind sharp. She remembered the mission, the silence, the feeling of command in her own voice, and how the soldiers had followed her without question, not because of fear, but because of trust. Something she had never thought she could earn from humans. She moved through the corridors like a shadow, her armor light, her footsteps softer than ever before. She did not need to make noise anymore. Her presence spoke louder than her voice ever did, and that strange truth haunted her more than any weapon. When she reached the training room, she found Captain Riker already inside, standing in the center of the floor, his arms behind his back, his eyes closed, as if listening to something deeper than sound. She stepped in, and waited without a word, without challenge. He opened his eyes slowly, and nodded once, then motioned for her to begin their routine. No weapons, no shouting, just movement, just discipline. For hours, they trained side by side, not as enemies, but not yet as equals either. She learned the rhythm of his steps, the shape of his silence, the meaning behind every small shift in his stance. He was not just teaching her how to fight. He was showing her how to lead. After training, Riker called her to the war room. Screens lit up, maps shifted, reports scrolled in silence. He pointed at one report. A mission gone wrong, an outpost destroyed by unknown forces, a scout team missing. He tapped a name at the bottom of the screen. Hers. You will go, he said, no emotion, just purpose. She nodded and left the room, her steps quick, her focus clear. But something was different this time. When she entered the hangar, the crew stood waiting, but not with cold eyes or cautious glances. They greeted her with quiet respect. They checked her gear, prepared the ship, followed her orders, like she was one of their own. During the flight, no one asked about her past, no one mentioned the incident, no one cared that she had once spit at the commander. They only cared that she got them there and back alive when they reached the wreckage of the outpost. The air was thick with smoke and ash, bodies lay still, metal, twisted weapons scattered. She moved through the ruins with care, her team close behind every command. She gave was short, clear, needed. They found a wounded soldier, trapped under fallen beams, his leg broken, his breath shallow. She knelt beside him, wrapped his wounds, and carried him to the ship herself, her arms shaking under the weight. But she did not stop back at base. Riker met her at the dock again. His eyes scanned the team, then locked onto her face. He gave no smile, no words, just a single nod, and then turned away. Later, she sat in the small room assigned to her, a space she once called a cage, but now felt like shelter. She stared at her reflection in the metal panel on the wall. Her eyes looked different, not softer, but deeper, as if something inside had changed and would never go back. She thought about speaking again, about asking Riker if she had earned back her voice, if her silence had proven her strength, but the words did not come, because deep down she knew the truth. This silence was not a punishment, it was a lesson, and she had not yet reached the end of it. She started to write again, this time not to beg for her voice, but to understand it. She wrote about what she had seen in the outpost, the dead, the broken, the fire. She wrote about how fear looked in the eyes of a human soldier, how it faded when she stood between him and danger, how her voice might have calmed him if she had been allowed to use it. She wondered what Riker would say if he read her words, if he would finally speak more than a few cold lines, or if he would stay silent, like always, letting her learn on her own. But deep down, she also wondered something else. Why did his silence feel more powerful than any speech she had ever heard? Why did she crave his approval more than victory? Why did her breath catch every time his eyes met hers across the training floor? The door to her room chimed a soft sound. She stood and opened it, expecting orders, maybe another mission, but no one was there. Only a small device left on the floor, a message pad, glowing faint blue. She picked it up and pressed the screen. It was from Riker, only 4 words. Tomorrow you will speak. Her hands shook, her heart raced, her eyes wide with something she had not felt in years. Not fear, not pride, but something closer to hope. She sat down again, placed the pad beside her, and closed her eyes. For the first time, she dreamed not of war, but of words. Morning light spilled across the training hall as Liren stepped through the doors, her heart beating harder than before, her mind full of the message Riker had sent the night before. Her voice would return today. But not as a gift, not as a reward. It would come only if she passed the challenge she had prepared, and she knew it would not be simple, not physical, not loud, but something deeper, something that would test what she had become in the days of silence. The room was not empty this time. The senior officers stood in a wide circle, their eyes sharp, their arms crossed behind their backs. Beside them stood soldiers, both alien and human, watching with quiet interest. Not one of them smiled, not one of them mocked her, but none offered warmth. Either at the center of the circle stood Riker, calm, tall, steady, like a mountain, waiting for the storm to pass through him. He spoke without raising his voice. This challenge is not about speed, or strength, or rage. It is about control. It is about understanding what it means to be a leader, not a warrior, not a destroyer, but one who carries the weight of many, not just their own pride. Liren stood across from him, no armor this time. Just light cloth training gear that left her feeling bare, vulnerable, yet ready. She did not speak. Her silence was her answer. He moved first, slow, smooth steps, hands raised open. He was not attacking, not defending, just showing space, rhythm, intention. She mirrored him step for step, breath for breath, until their bodies danced like echoes, not clashing but circling like two flames in balance. Then he spoke again. Tell me what you see, he said. She frowned, her lips tight, unsure if she should answer, unsure if she had the right. He nodded once. Your words are yours again, if you understand how to use them. She took a breath. Slow, steady eyes locked on his, and answered, I see a man who does not need to fight to win. I see someone who listens more than he speaks, someone who makes others follow without forcing them. He said nothing but shifted his stance and moved again. Faster this time, his steps testing her resolve, his presence pushing her edge. She followed, matched, blocked, every move not with brute power but with flow like water around stone. Then he stopped again and asked, "What do you fight for now?" Her answer came without thought. "I fight to protect, not to prove. I fight to unite, not to conquer. I fight because silence showed me who I am." The officers nodded slightly, one by one, as if her words filled a space that had waited too long to be used. Riker stepped forward close enough that she could feel the heat of his breath, not a threat, not a warning, but a moment of truth. "Then speak," he said, "not to me." To them she turned slowly, facing the officers, the soldiers, the ones who once called her a traitor. "Peace, a wild thing." She raised her chin, and let the words come. "I was born to fight, raised to break, to burn, to win at all cost. I believed that voice was weakness, that silence was defeat, but I was wrong. Silence taught me patience. Silence taught me honor. Silence taught me to hear what words often hide." She paused, scanning their faces, seeing something shift, not fear, not shock, but quiet respect. "I see now that humans do not lack strength. They carry it differently. They carry it in their hearts, in their choices, in their silence. And I see now that power is not in how loud we speak, but in how deeply we listen." Riker stepped back then, and the officers parted, allowing her to stand beside him, not below, not behind, but beside. From this day forward, she would speak not as a rebel, not as a warrior without a cause, but as someone who had been changed by silence, forged by restraint, made stronger by loss, and now ready to lead, not just her people, but anyone who would follow that night. She sat outside under the stars, the wind cool across her skin, the base quiet after long drills and meetings. Her voice had returned, but she used it less now. Each word mattered, each breath meant something new. Riker approached without sound, and sat beside her for a while. Neither of them spoke at first, the silence between them full of weight, full of meaning. Then she asked, "Why did you give me silence instead of punishment?" He looked up at the stars, and said, "Because silence shows what noise hides, and you needed to hear yourself before anyone else could." She nodded slowly, and for the first time in a long time, she smiled, not in victory, not in pride, but in peace. The sirens screamed across the base before the sun had even touched the tower's red lights, flashed through the hall's boots, pounded against metal floors. Voices shouted orders and warnings and calls for help. Liren woke to the sound of chaos, her body already moving before her mind could catch up. Her hands reached for her armor, her blades, her communicator, but the signal was already dead. Something was wrong, deeper than drills, louder than routine. This was not training, this was not a test. This was real. She burst into the hallway, where soldiers ran in every direction, eyes wide, weapons ready. Smoke drifted from the south wing, and fire danced behind shattered windows. The sound of explosions echoed through the walls, and in the middle of it all, a single voice cut through like steel. "Fall back to the main chamber. Defend the command core, protect the civilians." Captain Riker was alive, his voice strong, his orders clear, but even through the noise, Liren could hear pain in his tone. Something off, something broken. She sprinted toward the core, dodging debris, jumping fallen beams, stepping over injured fighters, shouting for medics, and guiding panicked recruits toward safe paths. Her mind raced with questions, but her focus stayed sharp. Each second counted, each life mattered. She reached the chamber and found the doors bent inward, black scorch marks lining the walls, and smoke rising from deep inside. Her gut twisted as she stepped through and found Riker collapsed near the console, his leg pinned under fallen steel, blood trailing down his side, and his weapon just out of reach. 3 enemy soldiers moved toward him, not yet aware of her presence. Their backs open, their focus on the wounded human who still tried to crawl forward without hesitation. She moved, silent, swift, deadly. Her blades found their marks before they could raise their guns. Her body moved like wind, like shadow, like fury wrapped in silence. And when the last one fell, she dropped beside Riker and lifted the beam with shaking arms, teeth clenched, muscles burning. She freed him and pulled him back behind cover. His breath was shallow, his face pale, but his eyes stayed locked on hers, steady and sure. "I told you," he whispered, "you would speak again." She smiled through the smoke and lifted him onto her shoulder, dragging him through fire and ash toward the exit, each step harder than the last. But she did not stop. She would not stop outside. She signaled for evac, her voice loud, her tone sharp, her command final, and the soldiers listened without pause, moving to cover her, giving support, clearing a path to the med shuttle. As the doors closed behind them and the ship lifted into the air, Riker reached out his hand and touched her arm, his grip weak but firm enough. "Speak," he said again, "not as a test, not as an order, but as a gift." And she did. "Riker," she said softly, her first spoken word in days, maybe weeks, and it carried more than sound. It carried fire, it carried memory, it carried something new. He smiled faintly before slipping into unconsciousness, and she stayed by his side the entire flight, her hand never leaving his. When they landed, the medics rushed in, took him away, and she was left standing alone in the wind. Her armor scorched, her face lined with ash, her body trembling with exhaustion. The base was still in crisis. Fires, burning alarms, still ringing, but her voice had returned, not just in speech, but in command. She gave orders, saved the wounded, helped the engineers, shut down broken systems, and when the enemy tried to breach again, she led the counterstrike herself, pushing them back with a team that followed her, like they had followed him. By the time the sun set, the base was stable, the fires gone, the attackers scattered, and the silence that returned was not the same as before. It was filled with purpose, filled with unity, filled with a new kind of strength. That night, she sat outside the medwing, watching stars drift above the ruined towers, her thoughts on the man inside the room, the one who had given her silence when she craved noise, and voice when she earned truth. A young soldier walked up, handed her a message pad, and saluted. Without words, she opened it, and read 4 simple words scrawled in a slow hand: "You led like fire." Her fingers curled around the pad, and for the first time she felt something warm behind her eyes. Not weakness, not regret, but something real, something rare. She had spoken his name, and now she carried it in her voice, in her actions, in the way others looked at her, as if she had always belonged. But she knew the truth. She did not rise through battle. She rose through silence. The base had changed since the attack. Walls once smooth, now bore the marks of battle. Scorch lines and dented steel told stories of fire and blood. The air carried a quiet tension, not of fear, but of focused. Soldiers moved with sharper steps, engineers repaired damage with faster hands, and everywhere Liren passed, eyes followed her. Not with suspicion, not with distance, but with respect earned through action, not words. For days, she led the recovery teams. Her voice now clear, strong, measured, not loud, not commanding through force, but steady enough that others listened without needing to be told twice. She spoke in short phrases, gave orders that made sense, guided the wounded, and trained the new with a calm fire in her tone. Inside the medwing, Captain Riker remained under care, his wounds deep, but healing, his body still, his breath steady. Each day Liren visited, stood beside him, said nothing for a while, then spoke quietly about what had been done, about what still needed doing, about how strange it felt to carry his place, even if only for a while. She remembered the moment his blood stained her hands, the weight of him over her shoulder, the way his fingers gripped her arm even when he was half gone, and how he told her to speak again, not to follow, not to beg, but to lead. One evening the council called an emergency meeting. Voices had grown loud among the outer colonies. Panic, whispers about the attack, rumors that peace had failed, feared that the treaty was already broken. The room filled with officers, politicians, advisors, and more than one pair of hostile eyes turned to her as she entered. She did not wear armor that day. She wore simple black fabric, the mark of Riker's command still pinned to her chest, not claimed, not taken, but entrusted. And when she stepped into the center of the chamber, the voices stopped, not because she ordered them, but because they wanted to hear her speak. She took a breath and began, not with anger, not with apology, but with truth. "The attack did not break us," she said, her voice steady. "It revealed who we are, and what we still must become." She told them what she saw that day, the fear, the courage, the unity that rose from fire. She told them how human and alien fought side by side, how lives were saved, because command did not come from power, but from trust. "You asked me to earn back my voice," she said, turning toward the council, "and now I use it to tell you we are stronger than fear, because we have seen the edge, and did not fall." Some shifted in their seats, others leaned forward, but none interrupted. She paused, then spoke again, this time with something deeper in her tone. "Not just fire, not just reason, but belief. Riker taught me silence, so I could hear the truth inside myself, and now I speak because I have something worth saying. We must not let this moment turn us back into enemies. We must become the voice that answers violence with unity, not weakness, but strength and purpose." When she finished, the chamber remained quiet for a long moment, then slowly, one by one, hands began to tap the table, a sign of agreement, of support, and though no cheers filled the air, Liren knew what it meant. They had listened. Later that night, she stood at the edge of the training field, stars above her, wind cool against her face, and the sound of quiet steps behind her made her turn slowly. Riker stood there, not fully healed, but walking, his face pale, but his eyes full of fire. She moved to help him, but he raised a hand and smiled just a little. "I heard your speech," she said, and she answered with a nod. "You did not just get your voice back," he said. "You gave it meaning." They stood there under the stars for a long time. No orders, no ranks, no shields, just silence between them again, but not the silence of tension, not the silence of battle, but the silence of understanding. He looked at her then, and asked a simple question: "What do you want now?" She thought for a long moment, her gaze rising to the sky, where distant lights blinked like silent watchers. I want to keep speaking, she said. Not for pride, not for power, but because people listen now, and I must not waste. That he nodded, and for the first time in many days. They walked side by side, not as commander and student, not as enemy and warrior, but as equals, shaped by silence, bonded by fire, and guided now by the strength of a single voice. The dawn light touched the towers of the base, turning metal into gold and ash into silver. The damage from the attack had faded from the surface, but its mark lived in the people who walked the halls with new purpose, with new unity. Lyran stood at the edge of the observation deck, overlooking the landing fields where ships came and went like birds in migration. Below her, the crews moved with quiet confidence, every motion tied to a rhythm that had been broken and rebuilt stronger. Her reflection in the glass looked calm, but her heart beat with a fire that words could not describe. A fire not born from battle, not forged in rage, but lit by something rare, something she only understood now. After silence, after loss, after truth behind her, the doors opened with a soft hiss, and Captain Riker stepped through his uniform, neat, his stride steady. No limp, no cane, just the same presence that had once silenced a room without a single command. His eyes met hers, and he smiled, not the cold smile of command, but something warmer, something human. They stood side by side for a while, neither needing to speak, until the wind changed, and brought the scent of fuel, and smoke, and life. The Council has accepted your terms, he said, without turning. Your role is no longer temporary. They want you on the high command, not as a symbol, not as a gesture, but as a leader. She nodded once, not in surprise, but in understanding. She had known this was coming, not because she wanted it, but because it was right. Will accept, she said, her voice low but steady, on one condition. He raised an eyebrow, curious, but not concerned. I want my voice to be mine always, she said, not to be used, not to be shaped into what others expect, not to be a tool for fear or pride, but a guide for those who need. Eth nodded and placed a data pad in her hand, the screen lit with new codes, new permissions, new access to things she once could only watch from afar. Now she was part of the core, the decisions, the weight, the future. That day she stood before the new recruits, a mix of human and alien, all young, all watching her with wide eyes, unsure of what to expect. Some had heard rumors, some had seen recordings, none had seen the truth. She did not shout, she did not pace, she simply stood and waited until silence fell around them. The same kind of silence Riker had once used, not to control, but to open space for me. Are here because you want to protect something, she said. Your homes, your people, your beliefs, maybe even yourselves, and that is good. But protection does not come from strength alone. It comes from knowing when not to fight, when to speak, when to listen. She walked between them, slow and sure, her steps light but firm. I once believed words were weak. I believed power came from fear, from battle, from victory, but I was wrong. I found more strength in silence than in any war cry. I found more power in control than in rage, and now I use my voice not to command, but to lift others. The recruits listened. Without blinking, without shifting, they felt it, not just in her words, but in her presence, in the way she carried herself, like a storm that had learned how to become ready. When the session ended, one recruit stepped forward, a young girl with bright eyes and a scar across her cheek. She raised her hand, then lowered it, then raised it again before speaking. Did you ever fear you would never be heard? Again Lyran looked at her for a long moment, then answered honestly, yes, and that fear made me listen harder. It made me learn what voice really means. Not sound, not orders, not pride, but truth. And once I found it, I knew I would never lose it again. That night she sat alone on the tower, once more the stars above her, the base alive beneath her, and in her hand she held the first report she would send as a full member of command. Not a message of war, not a warning, but a plan for training, for unity, for building something better. Riker joined her again, this time without a word, just presence, and as they watched the night deepen, she turned to him and asked a question that had waited too long. Why me? He looked at her, not with authority, not with duty, but with a kind of pride. Because you were the only one who dared to defy me, not to win, but to prove something, and in doing so you found something stronger than victory. She nodded, and looked out at the stars again. Her heart calm, her mind clear, her voice finally her own, not just to speak but to shape the future, and this time she would not stay silent.